Hello, good morning. My name is Amal Maruki. I am the Director of Legislative Affairs with AIA Pennsylvania. I want to thank you all for joining us for Shaking Up Small Cities, conversations on repurposing, remodeling, and repositioning Pennsylvania's communities. This is the second edition in our series, Shaking Up Small Cities, and I just want to thank you all for being here. Before we get into our webinar, I want to highlight some housekeeping for you that we should all be familiar with by this point. But this webinar is being recorded, so if you do not consent to being recorded, please drop off now. The recording will be shared with all attendees after the webinar through GoToWebinar, so you will get an automated email that has the recording for you. There will also be a survey that is going to be shared post-webinar, so please complete that. That helps us to ensure that we are giving continuing education to our members that really resonates with them, and also with all of our allied members, stakeholders, elected officials, and legislative staff. This course has been approved for 1.5 AIA-LUs. So if you entered your AIA number at registration, we will make sure that that is recorded on your transcript. And at the end of the webinar, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat or in the questions box. We will take them as the webinar continues, but we will be reserving some time at the end of our webinar for Q&A. So again, I want to thank everybody for joining us, and we are really excited to present to you today. And I am going to hand it over to our president, Jeff Pasva, to tell you a little bit about what we're going to hear today. So go ahead, Jeff.
All right, thanks, Amal. So this year's been a focus on looking at citizen architects and how architects are getting more involved in the design and community development at the community level, kind of going beyond the traditional bounds of the service provider role and actually getting in there, serving on boards, serving on state level committees, and bringing a perspective of design thinking to that arena that most people don't necessarily think of, be elective office, again, or serving on boards. And in this particular panel, we're focusing on how people are kind of moderating maybe historic preservation boards at the local level, economic development, and connecting people in a way that can facilitate the conversations between different stakeholders. And so the first panel we had back in October 7th focused on areas of the state that are growing in population and the challenges that come with more investment, more infrastructure, more population growth. It was focused on Lehigh, the Lehigh Valley, so Lehigh County, Northampton County, and Lancaster County, both the city and kind of the metro area. And if you look at the census that just came out in 2020, both of those areas are in the top 10 for growth in the state. Lancaster being one of the top, and also Lehigh Valley being one of the top. And they have the benefit of some anchor institutions already there that they could play off of, and they're finding a way to capitalize on that. And so, for those of you that joined for that presentation, I think that you heard a lot of different initiatives and ideas and challenges that they're coming through and how they're solving for those. Because just because you have population growth doesn't mean it's everything's easy to handle. So they're finding ways to actually bring in more investment again. How do they handle as more infrastructure comes on? How do they make sure that they maintain that growth? And to contrast that, we have other areas of the state that may have seen either slower population growth or decrease, such as you'll hear from Lucerne, which had some population growth but slower relative to the rest of the city, and Blair and Venango, which saw a population decrease. However, there's cities and areas in those counties that are seeing ways to actually still attract investment and economic development, as you'll hear from Oil City with Kathy and in Altoona with Mayor Pacifico. So looking forward to hearing more about that, and I'll throw it back over to Amal to talk more about our kind of what we do at AIA Pennsylvania, some of our legislative affairs challenges.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Jeff. And this is not about me. This is not necessarily about our Government Affairs Committee, but I did want to let everybody know we have a large audience of AIA members, of stakeholders, and like I said, of legislators and legislative staff. So I do want to let you know that AIA Pennsylvania is a resource. We do have a large Government Affairs Committee and a number of subcommittees that focus on building codes, education and school construction, DGS and procurement, licensure. That we have a committee Subcommittee on the Environment. We are also focused on historic preservation, and our newest subcommittee is a Housing and Community Development Subcommittee. We also have disaster assistance subcommittees, and we have task forces that focus on public-private partnerships, practice encroachment, and legal reform. So if any of these things pique your interest, if you would like to know more, or if we could be a resource to you for any of these subject matters, we have a lot of experts that serve as volunteers within AIA, and we would love to be a resource to you as an AIA member, as an allied member, or as a legislative office, either locally or statewide. So if you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch with me. Here is my contact information, and that will be in the follow-up email as well. So without further ado, I will throw it back to Jeff one last time to introduce our panel.
Yeah, so this panel has a very diverse geographic representation. Again, kind of the southeast portion of the state, maybe kind of the center of PA is where some of the growth, the more explosive growth in population is happening. But throughout the state, we want to highlight the other smaller areas of the state that are growing, or at least dealing with growth within their cities themselves. So Kathy Bailey is from the Oil City, PA, and the Oil Region Alliance, Oil City Main Street program. Mayor Michael A. Lombardo is the mayor of Pittston, which is adjacent to, or kind of between Wilkes-Barre and Scranton, if you're familiar with that area. Larry Newman is executive director of Diamond City Partnership out of Wilkes-Barre. Will serve as our moderator. And these panels were set up to have someone with the architectural and design background as the moderator. And so while Larry's not a practicing architect, she actually has an architectural degree and has served in a unique role for someone who's kind of pursued an alternative path from that perspective. And then rounding out our panel is Mayor Matthew Pacifico, who's from Altoona. So I think Kathy, we'll start with you to introduce and also kind of introduce the Oil City region to the rest of the panel. Well, not just the panel, the participants, and hopefully we can learn a lot more about what you're doing, the great things you're doing in Oil City.
All right, good morning. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone from Oil City. My name is Kathy Bailey. I'm with the Oil City Main Street program. And to give you a little bit of idea of what's happening, what's shaking in downtown Oil City, I put some dancing people on my title slide. So looking at the next slide, to give you an idea, as you all have already seen on the map, we're in northwestern Pennsylvania in Venango County. We are in the DCED Northwest region, that's Department of Community and Economic Development. And giving you a quick snapshot of our Main Street district. So this is the territory that we focus on. It's the central business district of the town, obviously. We are spread across two waterways, as you can see from the red shaded area, across two sides of the Allegheny River and also Oil Creek. So that presents opportunities and challenges in and of itself. But on the next slide, I'll go through a few things very quickly, just a little bit about our program. We are the result of a cooperative agreement between the City of Oil City and the Oil Region Alliance. We've been on the ground since 2011, nationally accredited by Main Street America, and we are a Keystone Main Street. So we're fortunate to have good partners with Pennsylvania Downtown Center, DCED, and Main Street America. And moving forward, we have a specific mission and vision. I'm not going to read through all of this for lack of time, but our main focus is making Oil City's downtown business district more attractive and vibrant. So everything we do relates to that, and part of our vision is just that attractive Main Street with restored architecture and attractive streetscapes. So one of our key initiatives is a facade improvement grant program. And that is something that we have been working ongoing here. If we can move ahead to the next slide. It is funded by Pennsylvania DCED. We have had 3 different rounds of funding during the periods of 2012 through 2017, which has facilitated about $288,000 of downtown storefront improvements. It's a matching grant. Many of you are probably familiar with this in your communities. Right now, we're in our 3rd round of $50,000 of facade grant funding. We've got 3 projects in the pipeline right now. But these photos show just an example before and after of past projects. Christ Episcopal Church up on top, their bell tower, the louvers were in disrepair, and our grant helped to fund repair of those louvers. Williams Travel is another, just one of your classic Main Street buildings. And that property owner went through 2 different grants and 2 different funding rounds. And so one was for masonry, cleaning of the building, and then another was for painting and signage improvements. So obviously it makes a big difference. And most of our projects have been small, but they've definitely made a difference over time. Another key initiative that we have been focusing on is our downtown mural program. And this began, the early phases were 2014, but by 2016, we installed our first 3 murals, another one in 2017, which is the Chief Corn Planter mural on the right. And then on the next slide, we did 3 more in 2018. And so we are moving forward with more murals and more public art as we go. We're actually in the process of replacing one of them that has been a little bit problematic. But our public art community, our public art committee is excited to keep moving forward with more public art here in our area. Another initiative is the Center Street Bridge illumination. This is something we like to brag about. One of our committee members had an idea, let's put lights on a bridge. And so we did a lot of research on that. And with the help of many other partners, including funding partners, we installed color changing LED lights on the Center Street Bridge, which is a historic iron truss bridge. Its arches are actually the inspiration for our logo. But as you can see, completed in 2017, those lights are on from dusk to dawn nightly. And as a result, we have an event that's one of our signature events, Bridge Fest. And that's actually a collaboration with the Oil City Arts Council for 2 nights, 2 different bridges coordinated by 2 different organizations. It's very interesting. So another moving forward, and this isn't a Main Street initiative alone. When we talk about some of the key projects in our community, the Town Square in Oil City was sort of a pivotal project. And this is a project of the Oil City Redevelopment Authority, taking what was formerly known as the Brody Block. It was Brody's department store with other buildings near it. Had to be torn down, unfortunately. That was one thing that could not be saved. It went through a series of owners, was very, very dilapidated. The Redevelopment Authority finally acquired it through a series of public engagement processes. It ended up being a town square, which we're very proud of. So, and right now the Oil City Main Street program helps to program that with music on the squares. You can see in the lower right-hand corner. During the holidays, our Oil City Rotary Club arranges for a tree. They find a tree every year, decorate the other trees with lights, and so there is activity in that square throughout the year. But that's kind of opened up space downtown and sort of gave some inspiration for other things moving forward. One key project is the Venango County Transportation Facility, and this is a project of the Venango County Regional Planning Commission. This involved the relocation of a PennDOT parking lot, and it is a 50,000 square foot facility, an $11.4 million project that obviously took place over several years before completion. And I think there are still a few minor things that are yet to be finished, but it is essentially complete now. There was a ribbon cutting ceremony this summer. So what that did was bring the county's transportation from an area in another community over into our downtown. PennDOT itself is actually one of the largest employers in our downtown, and they're right down the street from my office, actually. So it's a good synergy there. Another project is 100 Seneca Street, which is a former bank building. This is a building formerly known as Corn Planter Square. Some folks have heard me talk about this. It's a 50,000 square foot, very large building, but it is the Venango County Economic Development Authority that is spearheading this project. It began with a feasibility study launched by our Main Street program with the help of Keystone Core Services, Pennsylvania Downtown Center's subsidiary. And the county acquired that building a few years back and is working to repurpose it into, the hopes are, a brew pub and restaurant, a conference space, and some office and co-work space and maker space above. So $14 million price tag. It is, in the middle of stages right now, and we are hoping for completion within the next year. But again, that always depends on funding. So fingers crossed there. The next project real quick is the Downs building. This is a project of the Oil Region Alliance. I think we missed one. If we could go back one slide. The Downs building is, there we go, owned by my employer, the Oil Region Alliance. As you can see from the upper right, or the upper photos, in 2013 when they acquired the building, it's pretty rough. Over the years, they have been working up phase by phase to improve the outside with masonry cleating, window replacement. They are now working on the inside. But the plans have, the purpose and use has changed slightly over the past years because of the cost increase. Right now, the original estimate was 1.2, now they're looking at 3.2 million. And so, the exact interior use is still a little bit of a moving target, but that is intended as a best practice in historic preservation. So next is the Lyric Theater. And this is what was originally a vaudeville house. Actually, the original theater was destroyed by fire, and the Lyric itself opened in 1927. In the 50s, after the theater closed, it was repurposed for retail. And so a lot of those historic elements were removed and taken out. So it no longer qualifies as a historic building, sadly. But it was purchased by a theater group in 2001, who has been working slowly over the years to try to redevelop. And that is really contingent on funding, like everything else. But they have the design in place and hope to be moving forward with that if all of the funding aligns. Pardon me. Next slide. I'll keep moving. We have challenges, although we've had some accomplishments and we've had some really good things happen in our community. There are still some sticking points. And one is our only hotel in town is what was originally constructed as a Holiday Inn. You can see the retro photo in the left, which over the years has had several different owners. It was actually closed in 2020 in January, completely unrelated to COVID. It was a foreclosure situation. And the group that unfortunately closed on it, the previous owners, had painted it to what we fondly refer to as minimum security blue-gray. We're not sure what that color is, but as you can see, it is not a very aesthetic friendly color at all. And it just, the design is a bit outdated, could still be a good budget hotel, but right now its current owners, it was purchased in late 2020. They're doing some renovations now. Many of us think that this facility needs a lot more than just renovations. So that, the future of this is a little bit up in the air. But we need a hotel, we need lodging. We've got visitors who come and use our trails and come to our community. And right now we do not have a lodging facility for them. Another major challenge right now is churches. And we assume other communities are going through the same thing. We have 5 churches in our downtown footprint right now. We have many more within town, within the city limits. But this photo is St. Stephen's Roman Catholic Church. And it is part of a merger right now. There is a consolidation of 5 Catholic churches into one. And so this particular one has some masonry issues. Right now has been kind of moved as a secondary church. And so its future is very unknown. And, a lot of us are trying to figure out, what do you do with these, especially very large churches? It's a beautiful structure, could have some other use, but that is always very challenging to find funding for that. And even what is permitted according to the property owner and what is not permitted, that can be a sticking point. So that's one of our challenges right now. And we have others, certainly. Our geography, because we're split over 2 waterways, everyone's dealing with rising construction costs and the challenges with prevailing wage. Oil City itself has a lot of very large buildings, so we're trying to figure out, what do you do with those upper stories when we already do have, housing in our downtown? Are there other alternatives that we could be, creative with? And we struggle with the intentions or lack thereof of our property owners. Some of them, we all have buildings in our communities where People are sitting on buildings and using them as storage and not really having a vision. So that's a tough one. But one of our problems has been lack of community design guidelines. And so we are moving forward with a design guidelines project to create a set of voluntary design guidelines to help guide not only renovations and work on existing structures, but even new construction. As the next generation of property owners comes, hopefully we can provide guidance to things moving forward. So I kind of sped through all that, but I'll save time for other folks. So that is, I believe, pretty much all I have for today. My contact information is here. If anyone wants to reach out to me, please feel free. Thank you so much for letting me share.
I guess I'm up. Good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Lombardo. I'm the mayor of the city of Pittston. I'm presently in my third term. My history goes back to 1998 to 2005, where I served terms 1 and 2. And before I jump into the slides, I want to tee that up a little bit, because my path to the mayor's office is really interesting in that it was very much driven by Main Street and the condition of Main Street. And then sort of a secondary, but something that really motivated me to run was we had a historic movie theater called The American that was in downtown Pittston. And because no one could think of anything productive to do with it, they essentially ripped it down and created a beautiful parking lot. So those sort of things led to my path into the mayor's office. And quickly, I found the Main Street approach and got involved with the downtown center and really started to format a strategy on how we were going to move forward. But I want to tell a little story. I was driving home in sort of my first months of office, and right when the spring broke, and I'd laid out this plan for revitalization downtown and really talked about, looking at structures and cleaning up the downtown and lighting it and streetscape and deploying the arts. And one of the other things that I talked about was really that I've always believed that downtown has two functions. It has this practical function, which it houses obviously businesses in the service industry, be it retail and restaurants. But I also believe that when you lay downtowns out the right way, they could become a great stage for events. And we've used our downtowns that way. But back to the story. So I'm on my way home and I get this frantic phone call from one of my committee members who tells me that there's a building owner that is out, and these are her words, painting the front of their building in the ugliest color of blue that existed out there. So I scurried my way home and I was a little frustrated, but fortunately I had some time. It took me about 25 minutes to half an hour to get home. And I realized in that time before I actually got there that no one really goes into a paint store and says, excuse me, can you give me the ugliest color of periwinkle blue to paint the front of my building? So the gesture that store owner was doing was a positive one that hopefully was inspired, I think, by this message of we're going to do some things. And I thought to myself, there must be a better way that we can sort of have some oversight, into this whole process and give some guidance, because that's what a lot of people lack in their approach. So the role of architecture in my approach to downtown has always been really important. So I'm going to jump to the first slide, and I'll talk about that a little bit. So the presentation is called The Blueprint for Success. It's the Renaissance of the City. And I'll skip to slide number 2. Next slide. And I really believe that comprehensive planning and the role of architecture and engineering is important in the how do we get to where we want to be. And it's something that we've always done. And early on, which was pretty interesting for all of you attending this morning, I had this original meeting, and short of probably the meeting that the mob families had way back when, I called a bunch of architects and engineers into a room, and unbeknownst to them, the others were showing up and had this great discussion of how we're all going to work together and come up with this strategy. And by the end of the meeting, because everyone realized it wasn't about turf, but it was about contributing and being part of this plan, we had some really productive initial planning. And I know there's members of that group that are presently attending this presentation. So next slide, please. So this is Napoli pizza. And this was the condition that it existed in. And one of the other things that we realized that we started to run hard at things and started to do sort of all these disparate efforts that really were all over Main Street. And at the end of a year or two or so, we were kind of frustrated, not feeling like we were making any significant progress because it was scattered everywhere. So Napoli Pizza is important because it was really a departure from that idea of disparate sort of targeting to really looking at taking on a whole block and making a difference. So that's Napoli as it existed, and I'll move to the next image, please. This was an architect's presentation of what it could potentially look like. This material and drawings like this, these sketches, are really important, I've found, to give people an idea of what the possibilities are. Even creative people, I think, sometimes have trouble really getting over that hurdle of where we are and this idea of where we're headed. And then we'll jump to the next slide. So this is the finished product. As you can see, it looked pretty close to the drawings that I just showed you. Next, please. And then we started to move south down the block. And this is a really interesting, so on the left corner of that slide, you see the Napoli building as it was. And there was a building that was, Larry and I often talk about, you know, we have all these bowling alley buildings that are in town that are very narrow. And back in the day, the code was different. And to really cash flow them and make them move forward now, when you consider safety and accessibility, whether it be to the first floor or restrooms, it becomes very difficult because you eat up a lot of that floor space doing those accommodations, which are very important. So there was a building that was demolished, and this building next to it that says Wayne's World, we thought still had some character, and we started to do some exploration. And as you can see up in the top left corner, we chipped away some brick that was loose and realized that the building next door had caused extensive structural damage. The building next door, you can see sort of the outline of it on the Napoli building. So the result of that was that building had to be demolished too. The total area of those two buildings is under 40 feet. So we had to look at some ways to deal with that space. And I'll move to the next slide. So I always liked Bryant Park in New York. I thought it was a great space to hang out and do some things. And we decided then to look at the idea of a pocket park. And the initial go at it was looking at this sketch. And I'll move to the next slide. And then that's sort of what it looked like. One of the things we did do, though, is we eliminated that front wall idea because we wanted really the space to be more open and welcoming. And it's interesting now because this space really serves as a programmatic space, but it also becomes an outdoor dining space for Napoli. And in addition to Napoli, there are a couple other restaurants that are close around. And in addition to that, we find that people often will bring their lunch and use the tables and sit in this space. Next slide, please. And we're going to move down the block a little bit more. Whoop, I'm sorry. There's just an overview. Every once in a while, I like to crawl to the top of a roof and take a shot. And this is just an overview. You can see the side wall of Napoli and the park from above. And that's early on in it. Those trees have really grown in or bumping together now. And we're trimming them, and you get this really nice canopy in there. So it's a great place to hang out when we have our art walks. We spend some time. There's some musicians that will play in there from a local music group. We scatter art through there. So it's a great programmatic space. Next, please. And the next piece down is Pittston Dental. And this, again, was another facade enhancement. Much like Oil City, we've rolled out a facade enhancement program and also a sign enhancement program. And both of those programs have been extremely helpful to us. We've done about 20 facades and probably about 20 or so signs. And there have been a lot of ancillary benefits to the facade program. When we do the program, we actually take a physical easement on the front of the buildings, which basically gives us the opportunity to have some say in what happens over a 10-year period on the front. And then we haven't done it yet, but hopefully we'll renew some of those and be able to do some upgrades and touch up. Next, please. And that's sort of the final version of Pittston Dental. That one was a simpler facade. It really was a cleanup of the space and painting. We'll move next on the block. So this is the side of the dental place, which I draw your attention to the top. You'll see 4 box units that are an old heating and ventilation system. A lot of the buildings in Main Street back in the day were part of some type of dress manufacturing or some related garment function that occurred. And that upper floor was a dress related factory. And those units that stuck out were long outdated, and it was too costly to remove them. So as part of, and we thought they looked unsightly. So as part of that program, we provided some funds and able to remove those. And I'll move to the next slide. And this gave us a great palette to be able to do the first of our murals, which is a historic mural that was done. And you can sort of get a sense of those pieces coming together in that block. I'll also draw your attention to the red building, which is Napoli, and those windows are faux windows that were painted by the same artist that did the mural that you're looking at. And he and his partner did that as sort of a give back to the city. But it really gives, I think, a great architectural addition to that building. When it was just the red wall, it sort of stuck out and distracted you from all of the other great components. We'll move to the next slide. And this was another building. And this is a good project, but it's a project that I would say in retrospect, we should have thought this through a little bit. And one of the problems we have in the city is that we're running out of real estate. So to do a single story building on a Main Street lot is probably not the best thing to do in terms of future planning. So as we move forward, we've sort of altered our approach. We've rewritten some of our zoning to include demands that require multi-story buildings, at least 2-story, that would give us some space. It's still a great architectural addition, and you'll see in the next slide the completed project. And that rounds out that block. And it was interesting. So we started that, I believe, in about 2012. But doing that whole block had the most significant impact. So our approach now, we really try to look at whole blocks as we tackle projects. The other benefit, I think, of this slide is that you could see the streetscape, which is some stamped concrete, new sidewalks, crosswalks that are stamped like bricks, the bollards, and then the historic lights that we use for banners. Next slide, please. So the other interesting thing is, as we look through our inventory, we started to look at sort of what is the architecture like. And I had this great conversation with actually an architect, John Cowder, who some of you may know. And I was a little concerned about, how do we replicate some of the architecture that's there? And he actually pointed out a great point to me that I think is really important, in that you want to have some consideration for making a new mark. So it's not necessarily about matching what you have, but it's about blending architecture and creating tomorrow's historic architecture today. And I'll jump into that. You'll see some non-traditional, more modern looking. I'm happy to report that this was my sort of feel better about the parking lot that I told you where the Americans sat. This building sits actually now in the parking lot that was created post the American Theater. And we'll move to the next slide. And you can see Geisinger is really a modern structure that sits on our Main Street, and really, I think, is a defining jump off point for where we are at this point and some of the architecture that will blend in. And I'll show you the next slide, which is a residential piece. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed the slide. This is Lucerne County Community College. It's a satellite facility, and actually is a great repurposing of a bank that was vacated by M&T. And we're able to partner with M&T, and through a tax credit program through the state and the feds, M&T donated the property. That's the proposed look. And then the next slide shows you the finished project. And you'll see that in a lot of my slides that there's always some art component that we do to new projects. Below the M&T sign, you'll see the side profile of an iron sculptural piece called Pathfinders that was placed. We try to make art a component of everything we do. Next, please. And this is the Riverfront Condominiums. It actually replaced a single-story 6,000 to 8,000 square foot garment factory that sat right on the riverfront. It's 30 units, it's fully occupied, and really set the tone. It was our first jump into new housing downtown. Next, please. And the next two slides really show you the great views of the riverfront, our riverfront park, and the Susquehanna River. A lot of our cities in the Commonwealth really had the rivers in terms of their form, and a lot of us built our backs to the rivers. So we're actually trying to reorient some of our new architecture and some of our new construction. So we really take advantage of beautiful views of what's called Camel's Ledge up on the top side of the screen there, the mountain range, and then just some beautiful views of the river and our truss bridge that spans the river. Next, please. So that kind of winds up my presentation in terms of slides. But before I finish, I want to talk about, and Kathy brought this up, some of the similar challenges we have is that we do have a multitude of churches, multiple Catholic churches in our downtown, multiple Presbyterian churches in our downtown. And as part of sort of our next plan for the next 10 years, interestingly, 3 of our projects involve historic structures that I think at some point will be, presently we have the Fort Pittston School, which we're looking at doing a residential project with, and actually looking at getting on the historic register. And we've moved through some initial phases of that, and I'm hoping that sometime in late this year we'll get that designation back. We also just acquired by donation a Presbyterian church on Broad Street across from City Hall that we're working through and doing some stabilization on the roof and the steeple right now that we'll use for future community events and some space. And then our most recent acquisition, which is a very interesting one, is an old historic hospital called the Pittston Hospital that actually straddles the city of Pittston and our adjoining municipality, Jenkins Township. And we had to use an arm of our redevelopment authority called the Revitalization Corp that allows us to do transactions outside the city limits. But we're looking at those projects, and we will rely heavily on the architectural world to really work with us in terms of stabilization and also in terms of future use. So you can see that architecture really plays a significant role in what we do and in the way we plan in the city, and we'll continue to do that. Actually, the interesting thing is that this whole experience for me, starting back in 1998, I didn't say that I'm actually a school psychologist who now works for an architectural engineering firm as a result of my involvement in the city, because the mayor's position is not a full-time job. So I rely heavily on the people in the firm I work with, but also the architects around, and we do a lot of collaborative work. You saw, I think, a couple different logos of architectural groups from the Northeast that have worked with us on projects. So the role of architecture is significant in what we do in downtown, and I think it has to be considered. Thank you. And there's my contact information. Please email me with any specific questions or anything I can do to help. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Lombardo. I'll pick up from where Mike left off. Next slide, please. So I'll just start by giving an overview of downtown Wilkes-Barre. So Wilkes-Barre is actually 7 miles south of Pittston. It sits on Lake Pittston on the north branch of the Susquehanna River in the center of Northeast Pennsylvania's Wyoming Valley. It's the Lucerne County seat. The county courthouse is in the lower left, and currently it's a city of 45,000 people. In 1900, Wilkes-Barre was the 75th largest city in the United States. Today, it's only the 11th largest city in Pennsylvania. So that gives you an idea of the economic challenges that we have faced, like all of our cities represented here. In this view of downtown, we have 2 colleges in our downtown. We're very fortunate. The King's College campus is on the left, and the Wilkes University campus is on the upper right, and the core of downtown sits between them. Next slide, please. The heart of our downtown is this public square. Next slide. And just to give you a sense of downtown as we headed into the pandemic, downtown is traditionally punched above its weight as an employment center. It's anchored by Kings and Wilkes, and we also feature a very strong entertainment sector traditionally. Next, please. So I like to start with this. When people become nostalgic about downtown Wilkes-Barre, this is the sort of image that they remember, and all of us have similar postcard views of our main streets. Like most main streets, ours was traditionally first and foremost a place to shop. Next, please. Downtown's role as a shopping center, though, had already started to decline by 1972 when we were hit by Hurricane Agnes. The river flooded downtown in what was at the time the largest natural disaster in the history of the US. Next. Urban renewal is what allowed us to rebuild downtown, and we did it, unfortunately, according to the best planning principles of the 1970s. By 1980, other cities were very jealous of Wilkes-Barre's brand new downtown. Lots of big projects, lots of demolition. Next slide. The problem is it didn't last. Redevelopment served as a pacemaker rather than as a cure. It gave our downtown 10 more years of life. Downtown Wilkes-Barre, however, ultimately crashed just like every other main street in America. We just crashed 10 years later than everyone else. Next slide, please. Too many efforts at downtown revitalization don't heed this observation by the great urbanist Jane Jacobs. Downtowns are meant to bring people together. The better that they do that function, the better they work. Next slide, please. So this is what our main street looked like in 2001. We had 15 years of hand-wringing. After downtown crashed, a lot of arguments about what to do. And by 2001, things were really grim. Next, please. We solved it by hitting the reset button, asking PDC, the PA Downtown Center, to come in and help us develop a new community-based vision for downtown. The organization that I run, DCP, was created to implement the vision using the Main Street approach. And in fact, like Kathy, we are currently a designated Keystone Main Street community. Next, okay, here we are. We began with a market study, and then we conducted a charrette with the Northeastern PA chapter of the AIA to tease out ideas. We had architects from 9 different firms who volunteered their time to participate. This workshop really created the framework for what would come next. Next slide, please. So our downtown plan is driven by these 6 goals. Downtown will be safe, clean, and attractive. Downtown will be the region's college neighborhood. Downtown will be the region's walk to everything neighborhood of choice. Downtown will be the region's innovation district. Downtowns will build on assets like its historic architecture, its riverfront, its colleges. And we're going to focus on arts, dining, and entertainment. Next slide, please. We started by trying to create a public environment that's clean, safe, and attractive. In 2007, downtown's property owners created what's called a business improvement district, which is a funding mechanism that allows us to provide regular cleaning, safety, and other supplemental services to downtown, and really to provide sustainable funding for our organization. Next slide, please. In 2004, we had the opportunity to bring a 14-screen movie theater to downtown. We chose to build a mixed-use development that was designed to repair and knit together a pretty messed up portion of our downtown. It wasn't easy, but we actually got it done. Next slide. We leveraged the theater and our performing arts center, the Kirby Center, to kickstart the growth of a downtown restaurant district. Next slide. Downtown was built for a population that was originally twice the size that it is today. So like the other cities, we have a lot of vacant buildings. Those vacancies are opportunities to realize one of our downtown planning goals, which is to have the university campuses anchor their respective ends of downtown. This is an example. This is the Mulligan Center for Engineering, which was a $7.8 million historic tax credit project that was completed in 2019 by King's College. Next slide. And this is a former jewelry store that Wilkes turned into a new home for its Sordoni art gallery. Next slide. We've worked particularly hard to build a strong downtown residential market based around the conversion of former office and commercial buildings. Next. We began by incorporating 21 lofts into the cinema project that I described earlier. The lofts are mostly in older commercial buildings, and they form a liner that wraps around the movie theater. These units sold out a year ahead of schedule, and they proved the viability of market rate residential in our downtown. Next, please. We strongly encouraged our residential developers to use historic tax credits, and we also maintain a facade program that has helped multiple projects come to fruition. Next slide, please. But it's the presence of the pieces of a walkable mixed-use downtown, restaurants, stores, parks, entertainment options, that drives our residential development. The neighborhood essentially becomes the amenity. Next, please. So as an example, in 2009, the Army Corps, DCNR, and Lucerne County completed the construction of an expanded flood control system. In downtown, that work provided the opportunity to reimagine a park called the River Common, which is our historic riverfront park, and that park had previously been cut in two by a flood control levee. Next slide, please. The park is beautiful, but remember, most of it sits on the far side of a flood wall. So activation, that means concerts, kids events, yoga, is required to make the River Common reach its full potential. And so we spend a lot of time with our partners activating the River Common to just that effect. Next, please. The result is that we've added 216 market rate units in 9 different downtown projects during the last decade, and now we have 100 new units in the pipeline. Those units are attracting people who otherwise probably wouldn't choose to live in the city of Wilkes-Barre. And more than half of the downtown residents that we've surveyed, when we've done surveys, tell us that they're choosing to live in downtown specifically because of walkability and all the amenities that downtown has to offer. Next, please. We've also spent a lot of time working with our regional chamber and other partners to cultivate downtown startup sector. Our first incubator opened in 2004. And it ultimately led to a situation where pre-COVID, our downtown contained a third of all of the information sector jobs in the Scranton-Wilkes-Barre MSA. Next, please. So we know that during the last 2 decades, we've been able to get a lot done. We have more occupied storefronts, more market rate housing units, more than $236 million in private investment. We have 2 new hotels that are currently on the drawing boards. And the public is telling us, at least up until the pandemic, that things were headed in the right direction. Next slide, please. We do have, however, a lot of ongoing challenges. Wilkes-Barre is a relatively poor, weak market city, and particularly in our own region, it has not a great image. Our public square, which should be our centerpiece, is not living up to its potential as a high quality public space, and that's something we need to work on. The Iram Temple on the left is an example of our wickedly difficult historic preservation challenges. Like Kathy and Mike, we also have a number of churches that we are struggling to figure out what to do with. And then the Iram, which was built as a Shriner's temple, is sort of the quintessential example of the kinds of challenges that we face in terms of historic preservation, because we cannot afford as a community to lose buildings like this. But the problem is, what do you do with them and how do you get it done? And then lastly, We continue to have really low design quality in a lot of our commercial core. We have a long way to go before the facades of our commercial streets look as good as the streets in Oil City or in Pittston. Next slide. Our biggest challenge right now, however, is recovering from COVID. Last month, we lost 6,000 office workers in downtown Wilkes-Barre, and most of those folks still haven't returned. So we've had to pivot. We've created restaurant grant programs. We've created new events like this open air holiday market with pop-up sheds that were designed by one of our local architectural firms to bring people downtown. Next, please. There's my contact information, and I look forward to our discussion.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Matt Pacifico. I'm the mayor of the city of Altoona. You can go to the next slide, please. So downtown Altoona has seen a real renaissance occur in the last 5 to 10 years. Residents want to be down there for events and activities. Businesses now want to be down there. We have several new breweries. We have 4 breweries now in the city of Altoona. There's boutiques and restaurants along our main 11th Avenue, which is the main street running through our downtown. And a lot of that is driven by Penn State Altoona and private development. Penn State Altoona over the last several years has invested in buildings in our downtown to essentially create another a hub for the main Ivy Side campus that we have here in the city. We have some larger businesses that are looking at downtown and moving into downtown. For example, Curry Supply Holdings will soon move into their new corporate headquarters in downtown in the former Vipon building that they're revitalizing, and St. Francis University is going to have a presence in that building as well. When completed, it's going to bring about 100 new jobs into that building and into the city. But you know, a lack of developable buildings, because downtown is gaining so much popularity for people to want to be there, has led developers to look at the outskirts of our central business district, which has created a sort of hub or an extension of the downtown. And that's really what I'd like to speak to you about today. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So here we have our former Bon Secours Hospital in one of our city neighborhoods, about a mile from downtown. This was purchased by a local developer, Jeff Long. He purchased it from UPMC. To develop into the crown jewel of his Greystone properties, the Grand Palazzo. Next slide, please. And he used just about the entire existing structure to turn into 55 and over apartments. That's kind of his niche, what he does with his Greystone properties. He does them very well. But this one was something different for him, something that he's never taken on, something quite this scale before. So like I said, they're 55 and over apartments. This building, the main building here, has an 80 bed personal care facility on the second floor. Phase 1, which what you're seeing here is phase 1, has 114 apartments. Phase 2, which is currently under construction, is going to add an additional 39 apartments. And then between phases 1 and 2, it's about 300,000 square feet at a price tag of $45 million is what this project cost him. He did not want to stop there, so he is now in the process of planning to do a phase 3, which would add an additional 196 apartments and 280,000 square feet at a price tag of $35 million. Something cool that he did here in this, the main building, is he converted the part of the basement into an underground parking garage for 48 vehicles. Next slide, please. So you can see the interior, it looks amazing inside. Really, when you walk through it, you get the impression that you're walking through a Las Vegas casino. It just has that look and that feel to it. There's 8 shops in there. They're all open to the public. There's a restaurant, a coffee shop, a boutique, a hearing aid place, and a dentist office. Next slide, please. And there is also a really nice salon and spa in there, and I kind of wanted to show the picture of the pool and the hot tub because it just looks really nice inside. Slide, please. And then right across the street from the Grand Palazzo is the Puritan silk mill. There was a 130-year-old sweater factory. Next slide, please. And the developers have turned that into a $15 million mixed-use project. It was a 160,000 square foot building, but in order to accommodate parking, they had to knock down about 60,000 square feet of it. So if you picture, it was a T at one point, and when they demoed the front left side there, now it just looks like a number 7, backwards number 7. So it has a marquee end cap restaurant space with an attached outdoor seating area. You can't really see it, but the restaurant space is going to be on the left side there where the tree's blocking it. There's four stories with high-speed fiber throughout the building that can be used for office space with potentially a residential component on the 4th floor. The owners are flexible for all possibilities, including leasing or doing them as condominiums and selling it in sections. While this wasn't a former Nabisco factory, I envision this being Altoona's Bakery Square, you know, an office and tech campus that will add Class A office space to the city, which is something that we don't really have much of here. Next slide, please. So a lot of environmental mitigation had to occur here. There was over $1 million of environmental assessment and mitigation, which resulted in sandblasting all of the lead paint from the walls and rafters to reveal that 130-year-old lumber that you see in the picture, which is in pristine condition still. I would like to also take a moment just to thank DCED and our regional director, Jonna Pro, for their help and support with the ISRP grant to help complete all of that environmental work. There was a lot of it. And, you know, I'd also like to talk about this project used Business in Our Sites, which was a program that DCED had. And this was the last project that got the money that depleted that program. And I know we have some people from the legislature and staffers on here, so I'd just like to take a minute to plug the Business in Our Sites program and how crucial that program is for buildings like this, because when you're dealing with old buildings like this that require a lot of work to bring them up to code, there are finance gaps that exist. And what that program does is, you know, it allows that money up front, and then the payback doesn't occur until the building starts cash flowing. So it's very helpful for developers who are looking to take on projects such as this one. Next slide, please. So this is just the back side of the building. You can see they kept the smokestack intact there. That's a really cool feature. At night, they light it up and it says the mill on it. It looks very nice. One thing that ABCD Corp, our local community economic development wing, is looking to apply for an ARC grant in order to put a co-working space in there, which I think would be a good addition to the feel of what they're trying to accomplish in that building. Just a little fun fact, there's over 300 window openings in that building, and they did a very nice job of kind of maintaining the historic integrity of the building, but also modernizing it with the windows that they chose to go with. So I think they did a really nice job on this. That's all I have. I'd like to just thank you for having me here today. I wish I had 30 minutes to talk about everything that is happening in downtown, but I really wanted to focus on this neighborhood because, you know, what's occurring there is just going to be transformative for the city of Altoona. Thank you again.
Okay, so we're going to jump into a panel discussion, and I have a few questions for the folks on the call that we're going to talk about before we get to audience questions. So we'll start by asking everyone, starting with, let's start with Kathy. Who have the key players been in your downtown's revitalization?
Well, in Oil City's case, I would say it's certainly between the Oil Region Alliance itself, but really the county has taken a strong lead in some of our economic development. So that's between the Venango County Economic Development Authority and also its Regional Planning Commission. They have taken the lead for the Corn Planter Square 100 Seneca Street project, the transportation facility. They also launched a north side revitalization, kind of a plan, which incorporated all of those projects into it. So certainly our county has been a strong partner.
Thanks. Mike, other than you, who have the key players been in downtown Pittston's revitalization, would you say?
Well, I think definitely, the professional side of it with engineers and architects have played a critical role. I mean, obviously, the state and some of the entities, Matt called out DCED, DCNR has had some partnership. Obviously, we've participated with our county, our Community Development Authority, and our Redevelopment Authority have been critical in the role. But even the businesses downtown, because in order to move forward, everyone has to be engaged. So, Larry, you referenced sitting down in Wilkes-Barre and talking to the shareholders. Shareholders need to be engaged. So, it's the whole idea of building a village. It takes everyone to participate. And, the best way to keep it moving forward is to actively engage as many partners as you possibly can. And obviously, new to us is Lucerne County Community College, as sort of a new educational hub. And we're looking at creating some more opportunities around education in the future.
Great. Matt, how about in Altoona? Who have the key players been?
Well, I mentioned in my presentation there, Penn State Altoona and private developers. I mean, they're really the ones driving everything that's happening. I mean, of course, the city, we're trying to do what we can to be cheerleaders or to help out or to get out of the way if necessary, of the private development. But yeah, a lot of it is occurring, with that, and also DCED as well. A lot of the projects that have occurred right in downtown received enterprise zone tax credits, which were, crucial for those projects to move forward.
Yeah, and Larry, if I could jump back in, I think Matt brings up a great point. I mean, I think often government gets in the way of development and interferes too much. And I know that Mayor Pacifico and I share similar philosophies in that we really believe that our role is to create an environment that's conducive to that kind of growth and, backfill it with funding when necessary and when possible, but also to look at the structure of things like code enforcement and how do we do that and how do we make it really more relevant to now. And again, it's another reason why we need to engage the professional side of this to help us, do that in a way that makes sense rolling into 2022.
Absolutely. And again, I think we're hearing a common theme in terms of the importance of state programs, whether it comes from DCED, which is the source of both the Keystone Main Street program, but also so many of the other programs that we've referenced here. For us, also entities like the Delaware and Lehigh National Heritage Corridor and the role that they play in trail development coming through Wilkes-Barre, which I think is also true for Kathy. And Mike, you have relationships with DCNR as well. For us, our colleges have been critically important partners, and our regional chamber really was the entity that was able to jumpstart a lot of what we got going during the time when we were at the very beginning of the downtown revitalization process. Want to move on to a second question, which is the role that local institutions have played in your respective downtown revitalization efforts. And all of you have referenced some element of this, but Matt, if you could just talk a little more about Penn State Altoona and the other institutions and their role in your city.
Yeah, so Penn State, I don't have the figures for this year, but in years past, there have been 2,500 students from the campus, the Ivyside campus, which is Penn State Altoona's main campus, is about a mile and a half from the downtown. So, having some of those students from Ivyside campus in downtown every day, for hours a day, that really increases foot traffic and increases just the presence of people in downtown, and so so I really think that having those students walking the streets is definitely, businesses are seeing that, they're taking notice, and they want to be downtown because that's where the action is. And with St. Francis coming in here now as well, that's going to be something new to us. We're really excited with what they're going to bring to our downtown. I know that Penn State is actually looking forward to it because they see this as complementary. They don't view this as competition or anything. So yeah, it's good that there's those sort of partnerships.
And Mike, anything you would want to add in terms of institutional participation in the Main Street effort?
Well, I think other than the obvious, the other thing, and Larry, you and I have talked about this a lot. I mean, much like healthcare, educational institutions, for the most part, are sort of immune to some of the challenges of economics that some of our other businesses see. So if you can get them here, it gives you a stable base. Now, last year was a little different with pandemic, but even through that, we were able to maintain it. And I think the other piece is that when you talk about higher ed, it really, it needs to be part of a cornerstone of what you do in a community. I think education needs to be propped out front, and there needs to be collaboration between the municipality and those places. Far too often, I think there's a line of divide because, when things get difficult economically, municipalities tend to say, they tend to look at the nonprofits as well. If they were only paying taxes, look how much better we'd be. That's a really short-sighted, I think, view of things, because as you study out the implications of having institutions downtown, you see that the economics are far greater than what you'd get for building number B.
Kathy, what are your thoughts regarding an institutional role in the Main Street effort in Oil City? Oh, there you go.
There we go. I would say that our PennDOT office has been a really good partner to us. They are located right here in downtown. I mentioned before, they're one of our top employers in the county. And so having them located right down the street, it's very easy for us to just stop in and, if they've participated in things from time to time with us. They've been a part, obviously, of the transportation facility project. But also, even just their presence downtown, having that workforce here, we really missed them during the pandemic when folks were working from home. So it's good to have them back. But they're one of our larger partners, I would say. We do have a college also, Venango College of Clarion University, which is now in the process of a little bit of a merger with the State Higher Education Association. They are not directly in downtown, but they've certainly been a willing partner from time to time with events and sponsorships and other things.
I would just piggyback on what you just said, Kathy, about the PennDOT district office in Oil City. I think that's another somewhat unrecognized element of institutional anchoring. And I just want to give a plug for the state's downtown location law, which is now several years old, but which has really played a critical role in providing state offices as anchors in the Commonwealth's downtowns and main streets. And all of us have been the beneficiaries of that program and the way that it basically puts the Commonwealth's traditional main streets and commercial districts up front when it comes to site selection for many different kinds of state offices. I want to move now to, I'm going to ask everyone, because it's come up in so many different ways, about the role of art, either in the form of public art or working artists in your downtown, how that has been incorporated into your revitalization efforts. And Mike, I'm going to start with you. If you could just elaborate on some of the stuff you talked about during your presentation.
Sure. I mean, art is a critical piece of the strategy for revitalization downtown. I mean, look at the studies, it's transformative. It really is inspiring, and it obviously creates a different level of aesthetic. And it's another way too to really celebrate other critical parts of the history of your place. You have murals that cover, I saw a couple of them in the Oil City presentation, that obviously reflect historic value and historic action that has occurred. So, I mean, art is just transformative. I think it's overt, it's there, and it opens up great discussion. And one of the things that we've found, and when I started this, my population was a little bit older than it was younger, and it was something that I contemplated, but the response has always been fantastic. And I think if you approach it open-minded, you see something and you can at least have a discussion. We have art walks. As you know, Larry, we built a gallery downtown that the Redevelopment Authority controls. So art is a really significant investment for us in the city of Pittston. And it really allows us to broaden the circle of who comes and why they come. I have a gallery show tonight that will bring people from out of the area here to look at some of the work of a local artist from a neighboring community.
Thanks. Kathy, how about you in Oil City?
It certainly plays a very important role. We do have a number of working artists in our community. Oil City, launched an initiative a number of years back to try to attract working artists, primarily because we've had a very active arts council that would program events and different other arts and cultural initiatives. But that has attracted artists. They have purchased homes. We have studios in the National Transit Building, which is an example of repurposing of a historic building. We have one entire floor that has artist studios. But they also, they've been participants in many things, either being part of some of my own Main Street committees. Some are involved in the city's Shade Tree Commission, et cetera. So, being involved in the community is important, but then, we take our public art, just like Mike said, we have our mural initiative, trying to do more, with that. I have an example of a particular salon that was purchased by a new owner several years ago. And she specifically said, one of the reasons that she decided to buy this salon that was up for sale was because she loved our murals. And so, when you hear things like that, it just kind of, at least leads you that sometimes you're in the right direction there. And so we want to keep doing that.
Matt, how about in Altoona?
Yeah, well, if you look at thriving downtowns, one of common denominator that they all have is that they all have very strong art scenes, you know. So in Altoona, we have the historic Mishler Theater. We have the Southern Alleghenies Museum of Art, which is their gallery is right in downtown. We have another organization, Arts Altoona. But you know, Southern Alleghenies Museum of Art, they got a new director last year who is from Pittsburgh, and you know, she has some really big visions of, you know, starting artists in residency programs here, just adding more murals to the downtown and to around the city. So that's, you know, something that I hope comes from that, you know, in the next few years. But absolutely, art is important to the success and the vitality of our main streets.
Great. So all of us have engaged private developers as part of our downtown revitalization efforts. Has that private development always achieved the objectives that you've sought? If so, what has made it work? And I'll start with Matt.
I think at the end of the day, the private sector is going to do what the private sector wants to do. So, you know, I think that we have great relationships in City Hall here with the business community, with the developer community. So, you know, it is important that I think that we share those thoughts with them. You know, and if it works out for the as part of their strategy or their business plan, then, you know, I think most times they listen to that feedback and they incorporate that. I don't really know what else to say on that one.
Mike, what about you? What are your?
Well, I think, you know, ongoing communication, and then, you know, I'll bring it full circle to why we're here. You know, the professional end of this, that relationship is really the great mediator of, you know, how do you get to what you want as the municipality versus what maybe the vision of the building owner is. I think that's why the professional sector is so important to engage and have relationship with them as well, so they understand philosophically and sort of structurally and functionally what you're trying to do and what this sort of idea of your place looks like. So the biggest piece is to engage the professionals that are involved. And the frustrating projects have been those that really have not had that element, that even with good developers, you know, they rely too heavily on what they think and their vision, and it doesn't always work out the right way. So that has not been often, but it does happen sometimes. So, you know, I would say that relationship with the design professionals is critical.
Great. Kathy, how about you?
Well, in the Oil City's case, you know, I would say the majority of our buildings are owned by, you know, a single property owner. We have not had a terribly, you know, huge amount of experience with professional developers. You know, we do have one situation right now where a new property owner has purchased several buildings, and we haven't seen a whole lot of movement so far. So that's a little bit of a challenge to us. And so trying to, you know, engage in communication really is the key, and we haven't quite found the answer to that question yet. We're hopeful.
I'm going to ask one, I think, last question to the panel, and then we'll turn it over for questions from the audience. And the last one is, what have been the pain points in your revitalization effort, and who were the problem solvers that you consulted in order to fix those issues? And I'll start with you, Mike.
So I think, you know, because my situation here has been, it's been 23 years, it's really, you know, staying focused, keeping the plan fresh, not really settling in and thinking just because you had success in one phase, the initial phase, that strategy will keep moving forward. So again, I say, you know, engagement of the shareholders, that's important, and then engagement of professionals to keep it moving forward and making sure that, you know, the plan is is progressive and it's doing what it's supposed to be, and it's the roadmap to where you're headed. Because good intentions don't always make for the best plan. They really need to. There really needs to be some attachment and some relation to what's the overarching strategy. So again, comprehensive planning. That's why PDC and and the different agencies from the state are important partners too. And the Main Street program, I can't emphasize enough how important it really is as a framework to how do you get from where you are to where you want to be.
Kathy, how about you?
I would say it's kind of twofold. One, going off of Mike's comments about planning, there's a little bit of planning fatigue that can happen in a community. And so there can be resistance to the thought of creating a new plan for a particular initiative, or even just refreshing, to make sure you're on track. I mean, our Main Street program has our own 5-year strategy. But what we are doing in our world, how does that relate to the city overall, or the county overall? And so some synergy there can be a challenge. But even just preservation efforts in general sometimes are met with resistance. So we, of course, our Main Street program is founded on historic preservation as an economic development tool, and sometimes that is met with resistance from some community leaders that simply see the way to combat blight is simply to take it down, and not to do preventative measures or steps that can prevent this to begin with. So those are 2 things.
Got it. Matt, what have the challenges been in your revitalization effort, and who have you turned to help you through those?
Yeah, so like I mentioned back during my presentation of how the mill project used business in our sites, I would say that's the biggest pain point, is gap financing. These projects are expensive, especially adaptive reuse projects, that do an entire building. So finding patient capital sources to insert into overall financing stacks can really reduce the risk and allow for payback as the space fills up and the property generates revenue. Obviously, the biggest partner in that would be DCED, right? Because they have access to all the programs. But on top of that, ABCD Corp, our county economic development corporation, local banks, and we're all partners together, and we all work very well together. So that is really encouraging to see that all of our different local groups here really do a good job of finding solutions to these problems whenever they get presented.
Thanks. And I would just wrap it up and say that I'll echo what's already been said. The Pennsylvania Downtown Center has been a key partner for all of us. And the Main Street approach is something that has been utilized at one point or another in each of our communities. PDC and the resources and technical assistance that they provide are invaluable, particularly to smaller communities throughout the Commonwealth. And the Main Street program of DCED and the other related programs, such as Business in Our Sites and the other ones that Matt and Mike and Kathy have referenced, are all critical. So with that, I'm going to ask Amal what the questions are from the audience.
Great. We have a lot of really, really good questions. So we'll try and do a little bit of rapid fire. And the one that I am going to start with is actually about zoning. So one of our questions is, how is each downtown ensured that zoning remains flexible as market conditions change? Is your city shifting your zoning away from use-based zoning toward form-based zoning? And the Wilkes-Barre cinema project sounded really interesting. So can you talk a little bit about zoning and how it impacts and any shifts? Throw it back to anybody that's willing to answer the question first.
Sure. Well, Go ahead, Matt, please.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
In downtown, so downtown Altoona, we don't have any parking minimums down there. And one way to kill a downtown is to put parking minimums in. So I think I like the fact that we don't have parking minimums in our central business district zoning code. So yeah, I think that's one way I think where zoning really can help to keep the appeal of downtowns for what they were intended to be.
I'm going to echo that. Like Altoona, Wilkes-Barre has no parking minimums in its central commercial district. It's given us the ability to try to build buildings that are much more appropriate for an urban environment. And likewise, our ordinance does allow for us to create mixed use buildings. With that said, that cinema project required an unbelievable number of dimensional variances primarily to actually make it work. So there's a long way for us to go. But we do not have form-based zoning. I think we're probably still a long way away from being able to get form-based zoning in Wilkes-Barre, although that certainly is something that would intrigue us. Mike, how about you in zoning?
Yeah, let me say this. I think the one thing that I would say is the most important part about that is, and as an elected official, one of the direct impacts that I have is who actually sits on the zoning board. And I think historically, places haven't done a really good job. We've just randomly picked people that don't necessarily have good background skills in zoning. They'd probably be better suited someplace else. So as we engaged this process, we've really tried to put some design professionals, architects, engineers, builders, developers, people that sort of understand what they're supposed to do. Because I think that's the best way to get there, is to have an understanding of what you're supposed to do and not to really just look at it from a black and white version. And just to echo, what Matt said, and Larry, you touched on, a lot of our downtowns have really, we want to blame a lot of things for how we got here and how they fell apart. But really, nothing has more significant an impact on where we are today from our heyday than the automobile. I have a main street that's one way because we're catering to the flow of cars. That's not looking out for Main Street. So, I think looking at those obvious things right up front, people figure things out. We have a festival that draws up to 100,000 people, and people like to ask me, well, what about parking? I never answer that question, because the minute you answer it, you create problems. People are smart. They will figure it out. And I think that's the approach we need to take sometime.
Kathy, how about you?
Well, I would echo. Fortunately, Oil City also has no minimum parking in its downtown, so that is one good thing. I think there are elements of our zoning ordinance that could be tweaked a little bit. One of them, for example, is just our signage ordinance. It's the basics and the bare minimums, but it has nothing to do with aesthetics. And then you can end up with things that really detract from your downtown appearance. So there are various elements that probably should be looked at.
I just add, just because your zoning ordinance doesn't require on-site parking doesn't mean that the lenders for a project aren't going to require on-street parking or on-site parking. And that's another educational area that we all have to continue to work on. So,
That's great. So we are 2 minutes away from noon. I wanted to ask our panelists, are you able to stay on for an extra 5 minutes to maybe get through some of these questions? We understand if attendees might need to drop off a little early. We are hitting lunchtime, but we will be sending out this recording. So if everyone is okay, I think 5 minutes, maybe 10, we should be able to get through the rest of these questions.
Sure.
Great. Awesome. So next, in order that they came in, so does do any of the cities offer any type of financial investments to get some of these projects going? What are some incentives that are around that different developers or architects or engineers might be able to take to their clients?
Well, I'll jump in quickly. I mean, we've referenced a bunch of those programs. You know, for us in Northeast PA, we have LSA, which is tied to gaming, and some money that's kind of pulled out of gaming in terms of tax. So we use that. We use a ton of programs that DCD have. You know, Matt referenced ISRP. There's really a menu, and I think that's one of the responsibilities we really have, is to sort of understand a project and match from that menu what kind of programs exist out there. There's always room for more, and there are great programs out there. Again, Bring Back Business on Our Sites. That was a great program, and I think there have been prior programs that probably, because of future and current funding, have gone by the wayside, but those programs are really important. You know, we have a bunch of architects participating in this, so obviously programs that are tied to historic tax credits and just tax credits in general, I think are good sources. Often communities get community development block grant money that could be used for some of these projects. Also, counties get those funds that come through too. So those are sort of some funds. Also looking at, I think, funding that is set to help overcome barriers in terms of accessibility. You know, all the projects we do, and I think Matt touched on this, you know, I call it stained glass. I mean, you have this ugly arrangement of shards that are laying on the floor, and you got to put them all together to form something that in the end looks beautiful. And that's what the process is really putting all those pieces together.
Sure.
I would just add that one of the benefits of Commonwealth Main Street or Keystone Main Street designation is that that district is automatically, projects in that district are automatically eligible for things like the state's enterprise zone tax credit, which is another critical component that Matt had referenced earlier. Historic tax credits, can't say it enough. And then also on the state side, RACP, you know, which has, for better or worse, assumed outsized importance in a lot of the work that we do, as some of the other tools in the tool chest have started to shrink. So those are all critical.
Thanks, Larry. And I just wanted to give the plug. Historic tax credits have been mentioned, but the prime sponsor, Chairman Dave Argel of the Downtown Location Act, wanted to thank you all. He's attending. So thank you, Chairman, for that. Wanted to get that plug in as well. Back to questions.
Let me just jump in a second and suck up to the senator for a second, because his work in Harrisburg has been critical. And I know Matt, Larry, and I have all talked about when it comes to blight and downtowns, there hasn't been a greater champion than the senator. So I think I speak for all of us when I send out a big shout out. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mayor, we couldn't agree more. So thank you. So back to some of these questions. 45 million and 35 million investment in Altoona, that ought to help depress real estate values. Have you seen any of that yet? Is that a correct assumption?
We have not yet, because that site is a KOZ for the next till 2023 or 2024, when it will go back in the tax roll then. But we're hoping that you know, well, we're not hoping. We know that that's going to spur additional investment into that neighborhood. There is a 27 unit market rate townhome project that is being planned right now, which would be right across the street from the Grand Palazzo. And they're hoping to break ground on that project next year. So yeah, we think that there's going to be a lot of cold transformative projects popping up in that neighborhood just outside of our central business district.
Yeah, Mayor Pacifico, I appreciate that. I'm going to stick with you for a second. You have a former resident of Altoona that you lost to Philly, but when they were there, the population was dropping to about 52,000 and headed below 50,000. You kind of touched on this, but has the new housing and any development that you have changed that trend? What's your population looking like now?
We lost population in the 2020 census. One of the things, so Altoona has very old housing stock. So one of the things that we are looking to do with some of we're also getting $40 million in American Rescue Plan money. We are going to allocate some, hold on one second. My MacBook's about to die. Okay, so we're looking to allocate $2 to $4 million to the city's land bank, which would allow the land bank to acquire blighted properties, demo them, and actually be the developer of, townhomes, single-family homes, to try to increase our population back up. We're trying to be attractive to young families. We realize that the pandemic, leveled the playing field for cities like Altoona, because you no longer have to live in Pittsburgh or Philadelphia to work for a corporate office or a Fortune 500 company. You can do that remotely from anywhere. So we're trying to attract young families to come to Altoona, let them know of all the outdoor recreational amenities that we have here, and we are a smaller city, but we're a cool city. So so yeah, that's what we're trying to focus on housing, so that we can increase our population again with young families.
So along those lines, and anybody can take this, how do you attract larger companies and agencies to the city, both for-profit and nonprofit? Any ideas about that? We've talked a little bit about families, but what about companies and corporations?
Well, I'll take that. Well, first of all, I would note that right now, I think the impact of the pandemic has scrambled the way that I might have answered that question 18 months ago. And again, I think Mayor Pacifico touched on the fact that some of what's happening right now is that really the people themselves, the workers, the talent, are the ones whose location decisions are actually driving, where companies are choosing to locate and how they are choosing to locate. That was true before COVID. COVID has now supercharged that trend. And while I'm not really at a point where I would say that the office building is going away, because I don't think that's accurate at all, I think that it's going to be workers and talent and creating communities where those people want to live, whether they are smaller places or larger places, that is going to drive corporate decision making going forward to a much greater extent than has traditionally been the case. So we are putting much more of an emphasis, as I said during my presentation, on our startup sector and on building off of the folks who are choosing to either return to the Wyoming Valley or who are moving here for the first time to start businesses. That's one of the big pushes that our mayor and our city administration are undertaking with their ARPA funds in conjunction with us and with our regional chamber.
Great, thank you, Larry. Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say that, well, since shaking up is in the title, I'll shake it up a little bit. I think the other thing we need to realize is that, the victory isn't only securing a big corporation in our geographic municipality. As you know, Pennsylvania's carved up pretty funkily, if that's even a word, and that's part of the problem. So, I've come to the realization that, victories for us are regional victories too. So what happens in Wilkes-Barre and what happens in Scranton has direct impact on us in the city of Pittston. And a contiguous municipality, Pittston Township, has a huge private industrial development that's occurring there. So part of the answer for me is how do we create a downtown that services that greater area, because that helps our viability too. So they don't necessarily need to be right here for it to be a success. So we've worked, I think, very hard. I spent some time at the chamber with Larry in the Northeast talking about regionalization and really attracting businesses. And there was a time, I think, for all of us that someone would come to us and say, I need 40,000 square feet, and we'd say, I don't have it, see you later, instead of referring them to Wilkes-Barre or if you're out in the western part to Altoona. Why do that? That's really short-sighted. Those people will employ people from your municipality, and they will have people that will live in your municipality. And as you talk about repurposing housing, there's no better way to do that than to create it to that audience. So we need not be line focused in terms of geography on that. Victories need to be regional too.
And Mary, you actually answered a question on how do the communities kind of work together? How do different cities work together? And I think that the regional answer really helps with that. Kathy, were you about to jump in there?
Yeah, just to add to that, I think one of the keys is always still the little stuff, making your communities as livable as possible. If it is attractive to a visitor, and if it's welcoming to a visitor, hopefully that visitor actually becomes an investor and chooses to plant roots, and maybe bring their business here or grow a business. So, the little stuff is key, keeping that going.
I would just add to that, when our communities were all industrial powerhouses in whatever respective industry they were industrial cities, it didn't matter what your quality of life was. You were there because the jobs were there and because the opportunities for your family were there. Today, it's been flipped. We've done a 180. Quality of life and quality of place, and making high quality places, particularly high quality downtowns, are no longer luxuries. They are absolutely essential to any kind of economic development that we are doing today. And I think that's a common theme that runs through everything that the four of us have been talking about today.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. So here's another good one. How does your city negotiate developer ideas fitting into your city's needs? Sometimes developers come up with good ideas, but sometimes they come up with bad ideas. And how does the city negotiate adjusting what their aspiration is to better fit with the needs of your community?
I'll jump in. I think by clearly stating what your plan is, so people understand that, and again, building relationships, because communication is important for everything. And we have not had that experience. We've not had a problem with that. We've had developers, I think, that have come and we've been able to find middle ground with. So that's really the key, is to communicate and to be involved early in the process. And I think, as Matt and I think agree, that one of the responsibilities that mayors have in municipalities, or whoever's out front, even Kathy with Main Street, is really to convey what the expectations are. We need to be cheerleaders that are saying, this is what we're doing, this is what we're looking to do. And I think if you get that message out there, you'll have developers that come find you that know they make sense in that strategy. You won't have somebody that comes that wants to build something that really makes no sense or can even fit in the scope of the place you're at.
Mm-hmm.
And go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
One of the things that we do in the city, and we're starting to do more of, is pre-submittal meetings with developers and design professionals to sit down with them, hear their ideas. What are you looking to do? Yes, that will work. No, that won't work. Why don't you try this instead? They sit down with all the departments, zoning, planning, codes and inspections, and just sort of have that informal discussion before they, do anything else.
Mm-hmm.
The planning function is critical, and having a plan that doesn't just sit on a shelf, but is actually something that is used and referred to all the time, and that both the city and the private sector stakeholders all buy into, whether that's something that's developed by the Downtown or Main Street organization, or whether it's an effort that's led by the city, and then sticking to that plan and having the courage to actually say, you know what, this is great, but this is not what we envisioned for this particular site. And this is not going to get us towards realizing our hopes for this particular portion of our community.
Yeah, and you know what's better than a ribbon cutting? A 10th anniversary celebration. And that's what we're thinking about.
That's great. So just two more questions that I want to hit on. This was specifically called out to Kathy, but I think that it resonates with everybody. What has been the impact of the energy industry, specifically natural gas, on Oil City? I think that I would open that up to say, what have been some other disrupting industries that may have provided an influx or a migration from your cities?
Well, obviously, Oil City, as its name states, I mean, it was founded on oil. I mean, this was an oil boom town. The town itself was not planned. It sprang up. Buildings were crammed into hillsides and along riverbeds and everything like that. So it was a boom town. And, the wealth out of the oil industry is what built the town and made it, largely what it is today. But the exit that happened, made a significant impact. And so that was really realized in the 90s. And we did lose corporate presence because of that. So that is one of the reasons why, we did lose population, and you have to force yourself to reinvent as a result of that. So the city did look to art as a means of reinventing and repurposing. That was one, and also the trail initiative too. So several years back, we were fortunate to be able to get some inspiration from the folks at the Progress Center and those that created the Great Allegheny Passage. Right now we have the Erie to Pittsburgh Trail Alliance. We're part of the Erie to Pittsburgh Trail. And so I would say our outdoor recreational opportunities and resources are a big part of what we're doing now. And we just have to continue to find, and build on those to keep reinventing. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, I think that it's great. I think it perfectly summarizes it. So I think that last question, what are some ways that you've empowered your architectural review boards to help with some of your revitalization efforts? And then tied to that, are there any updates that you would like to see to any type of state legislation, like the MPC, for example, that might help with some of these historic preservation reviews, architectural reviews, or just development in general? I'll kind of give everyone a little bit of a last word before we close it out.
I'll jump in again. So, I think continued legislation on blight, because blight is really a palette that we can really work from, and it really addresses a multitude of problems, whether it be in our downtowns or in our neighborhoods. It creates new opportunities, particularly in housing. And we referenced a lot, growth and where we were in population. And there were a lot of factors that tied to, why it's different in Altoona or Wilkes-Barre or Pittston or Oil City now. And there's 100 reasons, but I think we should really look more at opportunities. So those legislations, I think that help us, be it blight boards and be it the land bank, those have been critical things that have occurred over the last several years, because it certainly has economic revenue implications. And at the end of the day, we have to continue to run these places that we're responsible for, and that requires funding. And some of that funding comes from property tax. And in the city of Pittston, when I first took office, our property tax was maxed out, but at the same time, our property valuation was low. So while our number looked high, if you did a comparative study to a structure of us here and our neighbors in West Pittston, our taxes really weren't much different than them. Our problem was our base valuation. So all of these things that we do need to have some measurable effect on what are we really worth at the end of the day. And I say this over and over, one of the important takeaways from this whole process is that you need to have metrics that you pay attention to. What gets measured gets done at the end of the day. So we need to pay attention to those numbers and how these strategies impact. But again, from a legislative standpoint, I think creating opportunities that take advantage of investments and encourage developers and investors to come here are another way. And I think there are lots of opportunities for new creative programming out there.
I would say in terms of the MPC, I think tightening up the consistency requirements. I think looking at actually making comprehensive planning something that is more than just an option for municipalities, and looking at ways to help municipalities ensure that their land development ordinances and we referenced this in an earlier question, are actually positioned to actually be able to help that community achieve what it wants to see, either on its main street or in its neighborhoods. Because too often, you know, because of the amount of municipal fragmentation and the traditional lack of resources, there are a lot of places that don't necessarily, whose ordinances don't necessarily produce the kinds of results that people in those communities actually want to see. And so, as we referenced before, in many cases, you end up fighting the very ordinances that are supposed to actually be outgrowths of your comp plan and the comp plan's vision for your community. Now, that's not true everywhere, but it's true in an awful lot of places in the Commonwealth.
I would echo what Mike said in that blight, any blight legislation, any additional tools that the legislature can give municipalities to fight blight is crucial and so important. And I know we already mentioned Senator Argyle once, but I'd just like to give him another shout out because I know he is on the statewide blight task force, and I know that group is doing a lot to advance different blight bills through the legislature. So I just want to thank him and the statewide blight task force for all the work they're doing.
And I would add, Oil City does not have a HARB, and we are probably one of the many small communities that has very, very limited resources. And so that limits the extent of what you're able to do. And so, yeah, any tools that are made available that can be adapted by small communities or tools to help learn, help train, et cetera, are really key because we really struggle with that.
Yeah, if we believe that historic buildings are something that is valuable to all of our communities, and we believe that they are critical, not just to understanding our past, but also to building a better economic future, we need to continue to provide our communities with tools that allow us to level the playing field in terms of reusing those buildings and finding new uses for them so that they don't turn into parking lots, like the American Theater in Pittston or the similar examples in all of our cities. That's why the state historic tax credit is so important, but that's why it's so important to give us more tools in terms of what we can do with HARBs or with other forms of municipal tools that we can use to actually make that happen.
Great. Well, I want to thank you all so much for your time today, and thank you for a great panel and a robust discussion. Kathy, Larry, Mayor Pacifico, Mayor Lombardo, we really appreciate everything that you're doing to shake up your small cities, and thank you for keeping architects and design professionals and planners at the table. We know that this is not one person or one industry coming together to solve these problems. It is truly a community. So thank you all for your time. Thank you to all of our attendees that hung out with us for an extra 23 minutes. If there were any questions that we did not get to live, I will be sure to get answers to you. And I really appreciate this. Enjoy the rest of your day, and a recording will be sent out to you post-webinar and also a survey. So please fill that out. All right. Thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.